morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Apologize, a little bit of an issue there, but I think it's all squared away now. Hopefully we're good. I know a lot of our comment time is kind of impacted here, but the good news is we'll be able to start the show on time. So let me just check in with everybody real quick, and then we'll get ready to rock and roll today. We got a really good one. It's a great day to have Terrence Edwards on the show. Obviously, we're celebrating with Terrence the tremendous news that he was honored this past week as an SEC legend. We got some cool video for you on that and an interesting perspective from Terrence as he kind of shares what that was like for him. We got great news for Georgia as it relates to Jalon Walker, named the Butkus Award winner yesterday. First of all, this is a kind of a cool legacy for Georgia on this award in particular, but also just the fact that, they have national award winners now seemingly every year. And so, that in itself is kind of a cool thing, too. So we'll kind of celebrate that here today. We'll also just it's kind of amazing. In the midst of all this, Georgia also drops, the SEC does, not just Georgia, but the SEC drops the 2025 schedule. And so in the midst of all this transfer portal and everything else, you get the 2025 schedule that's kind of going on here now. We'll talk about that today. Bill Belichick's been hired by North Carolina. I think that's wild. In a roundabout way, this sort of involves Georgia for reasons you might be aware of. We'll cover some of that here coming up in just a little bit. So it looks like we are good on DawgNation.com. That's good news. So we're squared away there. Let's also check in on YouTube here for a moment, kind of see how that is. We'll just kind of make sure we're up and running on all of these platforms and kind of be ready to go here today. Of course, glad all of you are with us and hope you've all had a great day here and a great start to your day. Let me try this one more time. Over here on the DawgNation YouTube side of things, looks like we're good over here too. All right, so I'm going to kind of trust that we're kind of ready to go here and ready to rock and roll. So we'll do some comments at the end. Sorry about that at the beginning. Sometimes it just kind of gets a little tricky. So that is the situation today, but it seems like we're all set up for a fun show. So let me fire up the animation. We'll tell you about everything here, and then we'll get ready to get it going on what's going to be a great day for us on the show as we inch a little closer to Christmas, we inch a little closer to the college football playoff, and obviously Georgia's involvement in that, and the Sugar Bowl coming up on January 1st. So let's get ready to say hello to everybody here today. Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We are glad you are with us. What a fun day for Dog fans. Yesterday, we got the news. Jalon Walker wins the Butkus Award. I think that's worth celebrating. We'll do that, and I'll tell you why I think that could also have some implications for Georgia in the college football playoff. We had another big news event yesterday. 2025 schedule for Georgia was revealed. I think I probably feel okay about this. I'm curious how you feel. If you're watching on video, we'll take some of your comments at the end on that. Also, we got a great guest, Terrence Edwards, big event for him this past weekend. We'll celebrate that with him. And the wild stuff involving Bill Belichick and kind of why, in a roundabout way, that sort of bumps into Georgia a little bit too. So we will cover all of that. We are so glad to have you with us for. And by the way, an old friend may be back in our lives again. We'll get to that before we're done today. So got a lot to do. Glad you're with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We got some great news yesterday. I was so happy to hear it. I know so many of you are too. Jalon Walker, the Georgia linebacker, has won the Butkus Award for the nation's top linebacker. I just think this is tremendous news. And I think it's kind of true for a handful of reasons here. First of all, Georgia has kind of had a stranglehold on the Butkus Award in the Kirby Smart era. Nakobe Dean won that going back to 2021. Roquan Smith won that back in 2017. And now Walker becomes the third linebacker in the Kirby era to do that. And I thought Georgia did a great job yesterday of kind of showcasing when they found this out, that he's the Butkus Award winner. Got a big ovation from his teammates there in the Georgia team meeting room. I just think all of that is really exceptional, a well-earned, thing, and just a tremendous celebration. What a cool thing there for Jalon Walker. I love the stranglehold that Georgia sort of had on this award. But I also like the fact that whether it be Butkus or a couple of Mackey Awards for Brock Bowers, we've seen Thorpe Award and Nagurski Award and, an Outland Trophy, that Georgia just sort of has in the smart era like a national award winner every single year. And there's all these different ways you kind of try to quantify and sort of demonstrate just how successful Georgia has been in the smart era. But the fact that year after year after year, there's these national awards being won, I think that sort of speaks to the great legacy that Georgia's putting together, and Jalon Walker adds to that. Now, in addition to this, I also really like this for Jalon personally, and I remember when Jalon committed to Georgia, when I first started learning about him as a player, I just remember thinking, and gosh knows I get plenty wrong, and this is not necessarily a story about my accurate prediction, because the point is, when you look at Jalon Walker, I just remember sort of thinking, this just sort of feels like a sure thing. Like every now and then there are a handful of players that are just obviously going to be good. And I don't mean just from like the film, because honestly I'm not, a scout. That's not what I pretend to be. But just in terms of the overall package, the way in which he even spoke as a recruit at his commitment ceremony, he just sort of came across as like just the sharpest guy in the world. And obviously on film, you could recognize he was a very good football player. And as I said, even on a program like Georgia that mostly only brings in elite recruits, you looked at a guy like Walker, even in comparison to other elite recruits, and said, this is just a sure thing. This is just a player that's going to be obviously very, very good. And, of course, during his Georgia career, that's everything that Jalon Walker's been. A little bit different profile, we would say, as a player than, like, say, Nakobe Dean and Roquan Smith before him that won this award. Those were guys that I sort of think of in the sort of very traditional inside linebacker role. Sort of like if you went into like a factory and sort of built an inside linebacker, you'd build a Nakobe or you'd build a Roquan. They just sort of seemed like they were designed by a team of engineers. Rather, this is just what an inside linebacker is supposed to be. Jalon Walker is a little bit more of a combination of a lot of different things. He obviously can come off the edge. He obviously sort of plays the inside part too. He is that sort of hybrid player, which we think the NFL draft is likely just going to salivate over because of all the different things he does well. So I would say he's in a little bit of a category unto himself compared to the other guys that have won the Butkus Award here during the Kirby Smart era. But either way, just a tremendous player overall. So this was just really, really good news yesterday. So I also kind of want to use this as a little bit of a platform to also kind of take this to the ongoing discussion about Georgia getting ready for the college football playoff. Because I think the win for Walker, I think, kind of brings into focus a little bit of what the Georgia identity for the college football playoff is going to be. That all of a sudden, because he's the national award winner in a way that like Brock Bowers and Roquan and Nakobe and Jordan Davis and guys like that have sort of been in the past, because that Walker is sort of this year's national award winner in many ways, that kind of makes him the face of the program now in some respects, especially with Carson Beck kind of battling injury, then I think this does give Georgia a chance to have a little bit of an identity reboot coming into the college football playoff. Because, I don't think that we have thought this year about the Georgia defense as frequently or even in the same way, the same manner that we kind of thought about some of the Georgia defenses in the past. In 2021, you're talking about like best Georgia defense of all time, maybe the best defense of all time. 2022 was also stellar and top flight. This year, it sort of felt different at times. It had some issues with the quarterback run against Georgia Tech. It seemed a little bit uninspired against UMass. It gave up like 31 points to Mississippi State. There are a few moments this year where it's like, this doesn't really quite feel like what I've come to expect from the Georgia defense. But at the same time, this is also a group that held a playoff team, Clemson, to just 3 points. Went on the road to a Texas team that's in the playoff and many think could actually play for the national championship, held them to 15 points. Same team, rematch against Texas, held them to 19 points. Only 17 points allowed in a really big win for Georgia against Tennessee. That even in the midst of a year in which it sort of feels like it's not quite been the best of the Georgia defense, there have been plenty of moments within this year where Georgia did kind of play in a way that felt in keeping with what Georgia defenses have been in the past. So Jalon Walker's your national award winner. He's your Butkus Award guy. And now as Georgia goes into the playoff, I think there's this feeling here that it needs to be led by its defense, and its defense will be led by a guy like Jalon Walker. That if you can make a player like this the face of your playoff pursuit, then you could be really well set up for the kind of success you hope to have. And we've had plenty of examples of why this is true over the course of the season. I'll go back to before the tag game, when at the time we kind of found out that Walker was a finalist for this Butkus Award. They would go on to win. I thought Kirby Smart articulated very well in that moment exactly what makes Jalon such a special player. And so much of this goes beyond just the good stat line, the great performance, 6.5 sacks, things like that. So much of this goes beyond that into that sort of intangible realm. Kirby Smart described it well a couple of weeks ago.
What does he mean to me personally? He's an unbelievable kid, Christian, believes in his thoughts and processes, and he was raised in a wonderful family where he has a lot of confidence in himself to stand up, talk to the team, command leadership, demand respect, do things the hard way, and set a standard the right way. I mean, like, he is a great young man. I would be hard measured to say what his greatest attribute is, because his could be character. His could be the ability to run, the ability to strike people and be violent and hit and flip a switch on the field. But he's elite at all those things. I mean, this kid is a very, very special person on and off the field first, but he's also very talented. So I'm very honored and happy for him. He deserves that.
Do you love that from Kirby Smart? Boy, I tell you, I do. And when you hear Smart say those type of things, I think you're reminded why you want a guy like Jalon Walker at the forefront of all of your preparations for the college football playoff. And you want a guy like this to be among your key leaders for that game, whether it be against Notre Dame or Indiana in the round, in the quarterfinal round, or anything that comes up after that. You want Jalon Walker to be right at the center of all of that. And obviously in the aftermath of what Kirby Smart says and Walker winning the award, I've heard from some Georgia fans, and I understand where this question comes from of, well, gosh, if Jalon Walker's the best linebacker in America, how come he wasn't first-team All-SEC in the list that the coaches put out the other day? I think it's a totally fair question, and I would say that it's probably an oversight that Walker probably should have been first-team All-SEC. But I think there's also the potential answer to that question, as I mentioned a moment ago. Because of a couple of the games for Georgia, the bad start against Alabama, the sort of uninspired performances against perhaps lesser competition, the Georgia defensive reputation this year just was not what it's been in the past. And maybe that hurt Walker's candidacy as a first-team All-SEC guy. And the other guys that joined him on the second team the other day from the coaches list that came out, Mikael Williams, Malachi Starks, maybe it sort of hurt them as well. But I do think that we have all seen sort of elite-level play from Walker, and even if the coaches in the SEC didn't recognize that, well, at least the Butkus Award committee recognized that in giving him the award. But as you kind of transition now to the college football playoff, I do think it's fair to say that while Georgia may not have had first-team All-SEC guys that, at least on the list that came out this week, maybe the media will say something a little bit different later on, we do believe that Georgia has to have players play that way in the playoff. They have to play at sort of a first-team All-SEC level if Georgia's going to win the national championship and kind of advance through the playoffs. And that means Walker, you would expect nothing less from him. Malachi Starks, Mikael Williams, you kind of need that from them. Your third-team guys like Dalen Everett and Chaz Chambliss. Chambliss very quietly has had an amazing year for Georgia. Have you seen his stat lines, including another sack on Saturday against Texas? You need all of these guys to raise their level of play, and whether they've been deserving of first-team All-SEC nods or not, they got to play that way in the playoff if you want to get through this and be contending and competing for that national championship when it's all said and done in January. And the good news is, as Georgia tries to get that done, using its defense to propel itself to the postseason, the kind of leader that Kirby Smart just described, you better believe he's going to be pushing his teammates to do just that. As an example of this, I thought that Jalon was really good on Saturday with the media after the game, talking about the fact that in the first half, because of some ineffectiveness of the Georgia offense, the Georgia defense was on the field for like 20 minutes. And yet, like the entirety of the Georgia team all season long, they're not giving up, they're not tapping out, they're not doing anything like that. And I thought that Jalon did a really good job on Saturday after the game explaining the mindset that allows them to endure under those circumstances. And you can use this as a template for how Georgia likely will also approach its upcoming college football playoff appearance here, too. This is really strong words from Jalon Walker. Take a listen to this.
We work week in, week out for our off-season training to our winter training to our summer training to our fall camp. We work. We are a fourth quarter team. We work for it every day, especially on Mondays when we get the opportunity to run for it. The chances like this, just a great opportunity to get out here and play football.
So if we are saying, hey, the Georgia defense is going to be better in the playoff on a more consistent basis for perhaps 3 games than it's been during the 2024 season, a leader like Walker challenging them to do that, using the kind of tone, the kind of words that he used there, it becomes very easy to imagine that he'll be able to kind of get that out of his teammates, because it seems like he's been doing that kind of thing throughout his Georgia career, and we know he'll also be leading by example with a really high level of play too. And, of course, everything with the Georgia defense I think is made more important just simply because it certainly seems like for the Sugar Bowl and perhaps the entirety of the CFP, Georgia's going to be without its starting quarterback, Carson Beck. And while there's a lot of belief in what Gunner Stockton can do, I think it's also important to note that as college football fans, we've been around the block long enough to know that it's not going to be easy making a transition from Beck to Stockton. And when you lose your starting quarterback, there will be some pain associated with that, even if Stockton does, like he did on Saturday, play well enough to give Georgia a chance to win. It's still a pretty big challenge to put an inexperienced player out there in a situation like this, which makes the job of the Georgia defense in that situation all the more important. But the good news is, while we would say that's true, it's also a reality that these Georgia players do have faith and belief in Stockton. And perhaps this Georgia defense wants to play at its highest level because of the belief that it shows and has in Gunner. And, in fact, that's also something that Jalon Walker talked about on Saturday as well.
First on Gunner, I came in and I actually met Gunner Stockton. We had a moment. And it was on, I forgot what game I was here for. I came to visit, but I met Gunner there for the first time. And I always told him, I had faith in him. I always had faith in him. He's been waiting for this opportunity for 3 years. And once he got the opportunity, he stood strong. And got us to where we need to be and win that championship. And Carson, just a resilient player. He's a leader on his team to go there and fight through an injury before the half is over and then get back and do what we have to do for this game to have the outcome we did. And it's just great to have this type of team and role players on this game.
Once again, I love that, and I think that the role of the Georgia defense becomes far more important because of the unsettled nature of the quarterback position. And no matter how much these Georgia players believe in Gunner Stockton, no matter how much DawgNation altogether believes in Gunner Stockton, it's still a hard thing to step in as a starting quarterback when you haven't played very much and your first real big moments in the SEC championship, your first start's going to be in the college football playoff. That's a pretty big ask from a guy like Gunner. So therefore, the Georgia defense really doing everything it can to hold the opposing offense at bay just makes the job for Gunner all the easier. But let me give you kind of one small final point about all of this. Here's the other thing about Jalon Walker, the situation where he sort of finds himself now. As the Butkus Award winner, the national award guy, in many ways now fully and completely the face of this Georgia defense going into the college football playoff. The other thing that I think that you like about that if you're a Georgia fan is Jalon, like all the best of Georgia players, seems to have a real sense of the, if you want to go back to like when, I remember when I was a kid, they used to have the ABC Wild World of Sports. What was it? The agony of defeat, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. Remember that? The old show open on ABC Wide World of Sports. Jalon Walker seems to have a really good sense of the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. He's tasted both sides of this. He knows how great it is to win. He knows how terrible it is to lose, and he chooses to win. And I just think that is the kind of powerful leadership that Georgia can really benefit from. With that in mind, I thought Jalon, based on a question that Jeff Sintel asked, talked about that. When you're on set, when you're in the SEC championship on Saturday at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, when that confetti's raining down, it's raining down because you've won a big game. Jalon Walker really likes that feeling. It sounds like he wants to give Georgia some more of those opportunities during the college football playoff. Here's Jalon one more time.
There's no other feeling. I told these guys earlier, I mean, I've been on both sides of the ball. Freshman year, falling into confetti, and then and leaving with the confetti, falling on yourself last year when I was the championship. But, I mean, the opportunity of the confetti falling is like no other. You know, you just don't get these opportunities back. It's a legendary game.
When Jalon Walker says, hey, you don't ever forget those opportunities when you see the confetti fall. Well, the good news is the only games Georgia has left are the kinds of games in which confetti falls if you win. In the Superdome and at Hard Rock Stadium and Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the national championship, there'll be big celebrations to be had after all of those wins. And with a leader the caliber of Jalon Walker, Georgia might just have what it takes to get those big wins and make a big march to the playoff. No doubt Jalon Walker will be one of the faces for UGA as it does that. And as he leads, it certainly seems like Georgia will be in very good hands. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Meriwether and Tharp. We're glad you're with us. No matter how you get here, video, radio, podcast, just so thankful to have you for all of that, and so grateful to our friends from Meriwether and Tharp who make it all possible. I had a great time with Bob and Ashley Tharp there on Saturday. Saw them. My wife actually ran into them as well, going to the stadium separately from me. They're just big Georgia fans, and so Bob and his wife Ashley, they're going to be all the big games. They're a part of our DawgNation tailgate. I just love the fact that this is a sort of a selfish thing for me personally, but I just love the fact that so many of our great sponsors are also just big UGA fans, just into it, going to games, hanging out with us, just good people. And obviously we love having fun with them. Now, we also acknowledge that what Meriwether and Tharp is doing on a regular basis, for many of you, that's not a fun conversation, but it is a reality. And I think sometimes the way to get the most of the fun moments out of life is to sort of handle reality in the moments when you're forced to confront that. And if I could make all this disappear for you, well, of course I would, but we all obviously know that sometimes you just sort of have to play the hand you've been dealt in life. And the most important question is, well, how do you set yourself up for success in the next season of your life? And if you've tried all the options, you haven't been able to figure anything out, if divorce is just next for you, especially as you come towards the end of a year looking ahead to 2025, well, maybe it's time for you to have one of those free initial consultations with one of the Meriwether and Tharp divorce attorneys. And the good news is across the state, now you can do that, not just in Atlanta, but think about like Savannah or Peachtree City or Carrollton or Athens, coming soon, other places as well, that you can go into the attorney's office right there. These are law offices that are deeply ingrained in those local communities, and you can talk to those folks wherever you happen to be and really get, I think, the expert counsel and just, sort of a path forward, the next step for you. One of the big questions you're going to have is, well, how do you pay for all of this? And they've got some really creative options for you about how to get that done. They'll tell you about all of that. So please find them online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Meriwether and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we're going to have a great conversation here coming up in just a moment. Terrence Edwards, happy to have him. One of the things we'll get into with Terrence, as I mentioned a moment ago, is it certainly seems like the Georgia defense has an even more important role for Georgia now, because we know that it certainly seems obviously very likely that Georgia's going to have Gunner Stockton as its starting quarterback for at least the beginning of the college football playoff, if not the entire thing. As someone who kind of catches passes for a living and has for his entire career, is Gunner the kind of quarterback that can lead Georgia to a national championship this season? We'll let Terrence Edwards answer that for us here coming up in just a bit. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse. And I got to tell you, college football, man, it is just crazy because, all right, we just announced the college football playoff field on Sunday. We had just had early signing period on the 3 days prior to that. The transfer portal is currently open. We're trying to keep up with, okay, well, who's leaving Georgia, but now they're coming back in, and who is going from Georgia, but now they may really be gone, and is Georgia offering a quarterback out of the portal? Is Georgia looking at these wide receivers? Like, the news is coming so fast and furious that we're trying to do our best to sort of pay attention to it all. And yet, in the midst of all that, the SEC's like, what if we just drop the 2025 schedule like right in the middle of all of this? Now, we already know who Georgia is playing, but obviously the order in which you play them is pretty important. And so last night in the middle of all this, they just kind of came out with the 2025 schedule. I really have not had a chance to really peruse the other schedules in the league too much. Once again, we kind of know who's playing whom, but in terms of like the order in which you're playing them, I haven't done a lot of the other league schedules yet. If y'all notice anything about those, hit me up and let me know because I'm curious. But as we put the Georgia schedule on the screen here for a moment for those watching on video, now total confession. Total confession. But we're going to fix that Florida date. That's obviously the second of the off weeks for Georgia. But total confession here for a moment. I am always on guard for, we're really edgy these days. We didn't like how Texas was treated last year. We sort of felt like Georgia was treated excessively harshly. So I'm always kind of on edge for anything when it relates to these schedules. We fixed the Florida date just right there in the middle of all of this to make sure we got the correct one there on that. So you talk about in the moment fact checking. That's pretty well done. If you're watching on video, you may know what I'm talking about. But the point is, so I'm sort of on guard for anything as it relates to the Georgia schedule. But I'm sort of okay with this. This seems sort of okay, doesn't it? I mean, I think a couple of the things that stand out is you're playing Tennessee much sooner than Georgia has been as of late. In recent years, that's become kind of a late November game. Obviously, for most of the division era, that was a game that was typically somewhere in the middle of October. But the first Georgia-Tennessee game I ever went to when I was a kid was in 1988. Back then, Georgia and Tennessee did not play every year. That was week 1 when I was a kid. I know the famous Herschel, running over Bill Bates in Knoxville, that was also week 1. The following year, Georgia blew out Tennessee in Athens. That was early in the season. It wasn't week 1, but it was very early in the year. So Georgia and Tennessee, going back to like the ancient days, did have a little bit of a history of when they did play. It was typically early in the season. So this is almost sort of a throwback to the sort of the Red Pant era for Georgia football to be playing Tennessee, kind of early in the year like that. So you have a bye week on September the 21st, which is earlier than you probably would like, but that was also the same as this year. You like to have that before playing Alabama. I mean, can you imagine September 27th in Sanford Stadium for the game against the Crimson Tide? And ultimately, that's probably what is going to be the biggest deal about all of this. Alabama at home, Ole Miss to a certain extent at home, obviously a revenge game. Texas coming in on November 15th, kind of a late season, kind of a showcase type game there. Like that, that to me is like the really big takeaway is this is just such a massive home schedule for Georgia. For Georgia fans who've kind of waited for the big home games, you're getting them all next year. I mean, that is going to be such a hot season ticket, such a big deal. I mean, I just think that there's a lot to like about that. As far as true road games go, Georgia only has 3 of those, is that right? Because the Florida game's obviously in Jacksonville. The Tech game next year is in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So you're only going to have 3 true road games next year, at Mississippi State, at Tennessee, at Auburn. Obviously, the Tennessee, atmosphere is going to be intense. One of the things that I did notice, there are no back-to-back road games. A lot of teams this year, when it comes to some of our picks, we had really good picks because in many cases, we were going against that team playing the second of consecutive road games, and oftentimes that worked out for us. Georgia does not have consecutive Saturdays, in true road environments. So I think that, perhaps works out pretty well for Georgia. I mean, it's still going to be a tough schedule just because you flip-flop the location of the game doesn't make the schedule any less tough. And some of these teams, Auburn, for instance, maybe even Tennessee, have the potential of being better. Florida will be a team that's going to be circled in that regard. Some of these teams have a chance to be better than they were this year. But in terms of you knew who you were going to play, you were just waiting to find the order, I don't think you have a ton of complaints about this, right? Is there something obvious that I'm missing? You can tell me on that. But interesting to see the now official dates and order for the Georgia schedule in 2025. By the way, before we bring on Terrence Edwards, let me show you this here for a moment. What a cool thing this was on Saturday. And this is video only, right? We don't have audio for this, right? Video only. Yeah, as Terrence was honored as an SEC legend on Saturday, I was lucky to be in the building when this goes down. He's standing next to Rex Grossman there, the former Florida quarterback. By the way, a sharp fit for Terrence there with the sweater. You love that. Terrence got a huge ovation from Georgia fans. They did a great job of celebrating their guy in that moment. And it was just a really, really fitting, very, very special thing to be able to see that. I thought our Cody Chapins did a really good job of capturing that. Every team in the SEC, including the newcomers, all got, and this happens every year, their SEC legend to be honored before the game. And this year for Georgia, that was Terrence Edwards. I think that's just such an awesome thing to be able to see. And I was so glad that we were able to do all of that. So that's just a terrific thing. So good job there. By the way, speaking of the newly minted SEC legend, let's talk to him about his experience on Saturday and everything else going on around Georgia football. Let's say hello to Terrence Edwards here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So great video of Terrence Edwards and a great transition for us to be able to speak to Terrence Edwards here right now. Terrence, what was that like on Saturday? I thought Georgia fans did a great job of making you feel welcome the way that you deserved as an SEC legend. You had a chance to sort of rub elbows with other legends. What was that experience like for you?
It was really a cool experience. Got an opportunity to really reconnect with Rick Grossman, who I am beside. Ken Hamlin is another guy that we played against in the SEC championship game, so we got to really reconnect on that game. And then Eric Berry, who's one of my favorite players. I'm older than Eric, but I watched Eric at Creekside and followed his career throughout. Just an opportunity to really hang out with him this past weekend and rest of the legends, just getting to know a lot of the guys that I didn't know. So it was really a cool and surreal weekend for me.
Yeah, if you're making a list of the all-time great high school players in Georgia, Barry's got to be on that list. Now, that's a deep list that includes a lot of great guys over the years. But, I think for most of us, we'd say Barry's one of the best that we've seen. And so we're obviously not fans of the Vols around here, but we are big fans of Barry. So just kind of gives you an idea of the kind of caliber of athlete you're being celebrated alongside, because about as good as it gets going back to his time in high school here in the great state of Georgia, right?
Oh, most definitely. Eric and I have been at a few awards together. We got inducted to the Georgia High School Hall of Fame on the first ballot together. So we've been around each other a few times, and just really getting to know Eric, the person, is really what I really liked about the young man. He's really humble. He's really just a great young man. And we spoke about, his potential Hall of Fame bid. And I think he definitely had a Hall of Fame NFL career, I think it was the cancer that he beat in the middle of his playing career and came back to be a Pro Bowler the next year. Just got an opportunity to talk to him about those things. So, being able to meet Vince Young, someone that I've watched for years on TV, never got an opportunity to meet, was really a joy. So just meeting all the guys was just so surreal. And I'm happy that, my playing career is getting recognized.
That's right.
We were speaking about this past weekend, and we put in so much hard work and dedication to our craft. It's really nice to get honored for what you have done in your playing days.
Yeah, I want to ask you two more things about this real quick. You mentioned Vince Young. I'm curious about that. I know at one point in time you and I joked about, SEC legend Vince Young. That seems a little weird because obviously he didn't play in the SEC, but nobody questions the fact that Vince Young was a legend. In fact, the Rose Bowl win against USC, that's one of the greatest performances anyone's ever had. Vince Young, will always have a big place in the mind, I think, of a lot of us. What was he thinking about all of this? Obviously, his first time to be kind of a part of an SEC experience. What did he think about being in that game and Texas in the SEC? What was your experience like getting a chance to chat with Vince Young? Obviously, very new for him to be kind of around the rest of you SEC athletes. What was he thinking about all of that?
Well, I didn't really get opportunity to speak to him on that level of his thoughts about joining the SEC, but we did speak about just the Georgia-Texas game and, who's going to win and why I was going to win. So that was kind of the level that him and I spoke on. But I'm sure, anytime you get opportunity to get recognized, you're thankful and honored for it. And I'm sure that's no different than Vince Young and Barry Switzer.
Yeah, no doubt. And then, obviously, like Takeo Spike's one of your best friends, a guy that, is a part of a great Washington County program with you. And I know how close you stay with all of him. But as far as some of these other guys that, maybe you didn't have a high school experience with, or they were just sort of SEC players, either before you, after you, or during the same time you played, like how well do you guys get to know each other just because of that fraternity of playing in the SEC with each other? Like how many of these guys did you already know pretty well? And I guess I'd just be curious to know, like, on a regular basis, how connected do you – I know Jaquez Green is a good friend of yours, for instance, obviously a terrific Florida receiver. Like, how connected do you stay with these other, kind of SEC legends from kind of around your time?
Well, I stay in contact with a lot of, especially the guys around my time. I think I talked to Rex Grossman and Ken Hamlin the most this weekend because we all played against one another. But really getting to know Marcus McNeil, who was at Auburn my senior year, him being a City Grove kid, a local product, really nice to connect with him. Fletcher Cox is another one that we've watched on TV with those great Philadelphia Eagles defense. It was just really cool to talk to him about his playing days and just talk about the things that we all had to do to get ready to play for the game, some injuries that we had. And so it was really cool to get to really talk to guys from all eras. Getting to know these guys like Barrett Jones was a 3-time All-American, really cool to see. Nick Jokel was a 330-pound offensive lineman. Now he's 280. I'm like, how did you drop all that weight? So just getting to know these guys on a personal level was really, really cool.
The other thing I showed folks a moment ago was the 2025 schedule for Georgia. And Terrence, when you see Alabama coming in September, when you see Texas coming in November, I have a home game against Ole Miss, which is kind of a big deal because in this particular year, Ole Miss beat Georgia. When you look at this home schedule that Georgia's about to play, for a lot of Georgia fans, they've been waiting a long time to have these big marquee games in their building. Well, buddy, they get them in 2025, and they get them, Alabama and Texas just in the same year, for instance. That's a huge deal. What do you make when you see that kind of now officially on paper, what's about to happen between that? We're not done with the 2024 season yet. What's about to happen in Athens for 2025, that's about as big as it gets, right?
Yes, I think so. That's the first thing that popped out to me when I saw the schedule is the quality of home games that we're going to get. I mean, having Alabama at home, having Ole Miss at home, having Texas at home. Those are 3 games. And we know everything Kirby does is all about recruiting. So imagine the recruiting frenzy that's going to be those 3 games. And our fan base deserves this opportunity to have this type of game in Athens. And certainly I'm going to make myself available for one of those games, probably the Alabama game, since my best friend who I grew up with played at Alabama. We could ride over there together, but that's probably the game that I would go to. But this is you really have 3 games that you can choose that's going to be very electric in Sanford Stadium.
So I want to talk to you about this because I feel like you've got perspective on this the way that maybe the rest of us don't have. It was a thrilling win for Georgia on Saturday, but it's also a costly win, right? Carson Beck is now injured. There is no timetable for his return. I think many of us sort of take that to mean, well, maybe Beck's not going to play throughout the playoff. Obviously, it seems very, very likely they will not play in the Sugar Bowl, and maybe beyond that, too. We just simply don't know. So that puts Gunner Stockton in the spotlight. I thought that Gunner was really courageous on Saturday, holding on to the ball after the big hit that he took. Unbelievable. The touchdown drive to sort of begin the second half, really pivotal for the momentum shift that allowed Georgia to win that game. But you're still replacing a guy that had, at the beginning of the season, Heisman aspirations, first-round draft pick aspirations, and your first start is likely to come in a playoff game in the Sugar Bowl. It's a very heavy lift for a guy like Gunner. Everybody seems to believe in Gunner, but it's still a big task. Terrence, do you think that Georgia can win a national championship with Gunner Stockton at quarterback?
I truly do. And the reason I believe we can if we use his skill set to his if we use his skill set and not just believe that he's a drop back passer, then I don't think we can win if we just believe we're going to drop back 30 times and think he's Carson Beck. He has a different skill set. He's a tough young man. I just truly believe if the Georgia offense kind of revert back to his high school days and being able to use his leg, the RPO game, that is where he's going to be really favored to be successful. If we think he could drop back 30, 35 times with the inexperience that he has, I don't think we can win that way. I think Bobo and company did a great job in utilizing his legs. Now, they got, 24 days to prepare for whoever we're going to play, but it's now trying to get Gunner ready for this moment, getting Gunner happy with the play callers, get Gunner, I per se, get him just comfortable in what the game plan is going to be. And if we go back and watch his Arabian County days, I believe that's the formula to success for the Georgia Bulldogs offensively and Gunner Stockton.
Talked to Jake Fromm about this a little earlier this week. The fact that they have time now seems to give them the opportunity to, hey, if they want to kind of reinvent the wheel a little bit and not just the sort of scramble runs that Stockton could do, but also maybe some design runs and kind of a passing game that he's comfortable with that sort of takes advantage of, the way in which he sees the field and the stuff that he feels, good about doing, that if you want to really kind of build something around Stockton and the offense, having a couple of weeks to get ready for your next game gives you, I would assume, the freedom to be able to do some of that, doesn't it?
I think so. I think they have enough time to get the great minds that we have together and put Gunner in the best position possible to be successful. I think that's what you do as a staff is what does he do well? What doesn't he do well? What plays he like? How comfortable he is in certain situations. But the experience part is what he's going to be faced with. He's been very inexperienced, haven't had much game rep, and it showed at times during that game against Texas. But now he knows he's the guy. I believe. I don't know. I don't think Georgia has officially said that Carson is going to be out. If they have, I haven't seen it. But if we all believe that Gunner is going to be the guy that's going to lead us to a national championship, those coaches have plenty of opportunity now to build around his skill set.
And I'll say one more thing, then we'll let you go. The other thing here is it seems like the Georgia running game's coming together at the right time. Trevor Etienne, at least based on his performance against Texas, is back healthy. Obviously, Nate Frazier's gained experience. I thought that Oscar Delp was amazing in the overtime. Those two big catches that set up Georgia to eventually get the first and goal that resulted in the touchdown, that if you're trying to do some things differently offensively and put a lot on a player that doesn't have a ton of experience like Gunner, what a great time to have your tight ends and perhaps your running backs both as a position group stepping up to the forefront. That could be a big aid for Stockton, could it not?
I think so. The running game is going to be pivotal for the running backs and the quarterbacks. It takes a lot more for a defense to prepare for a quarterback that has the ability to use his legs in the run game or in the scramble game. So he brings a different skill set that defense will have to prepare for. Against Carson, using his legs, I don't think teams prepared for him to run. Now teams are going to have to prepare for Gunner as a runner and as a passer. So that gives us another asset to lean on to make plays. So I believe in Gunner. I had an opportunity to coach against Gunner in high school when I was at Pace Academy. The young man is a winner. He knows how to win. He's a competitor. And the biggest thing is we all saw how he got hit. That ball never moved.
Yeah.
So he is a tough football player. So I just like his intangibles that he's going to bring to the table.
Great stuff, Terrence. I appreciate your insight on all of this. And, of course, we're kind of coming up on that time of year when the bubble work is continuing. You and, other great trainers like Ron Veal with the quarterbacks and everybody kind of coming together here and doing that work to be ready for spring practice. Will be here before you know it, the 2025 season, which will be there shortly after that. If people want to be a part of the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy and the great work that you're doing on a regular basis, how can they connect with you?
You can connect with me on all social media platforms, and the official date is the first Monday in February.
Okay.
Is when we're going to get started.
Good stuff, Terrence. Well, listen, enjoy the week here. Appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to getting a chance to hopefully chat with you very soon as well.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I think that Terrence provides you really a great level of insight there on Gunner Stockton, that teammates believe in him. He was able to be a part of a really big win, and he brings a unique skill set to the table. Not just a runner, but a tough runner, a guy that absorbed really hard contact, did not fumble the football. That was a really nice thing. And we would add to that, to keep it real here for a moment, while all of those aspects are really, really attractive about Gunner Stockton, Georgia does need to win a championship, be more effective throwing it than it was on Saturday. Was it 16 attempts for 74 yards in total? There was the interception. You got to find a way to be a little more effective in the passing game, and with time to prepare, we think that has a chance to happen. We just want to be really careful that we don't kind of myth make about this and sort of make it sound easier than it is. If Stockton comes out there against whether it be Notre Dame or Indiana, if he plays the game of his life, let's leave some room to be impressed by that. Let's leave some room to be thankful that he was able to get that job done. Let's start with just the sort of base level expectation of, can you be an effective replacement for Carson Beck? And if something more magical than that happens, then obviously we're there to enjoy that. But we just want to be really realistic about what it's like to replace a player who had now had essentially 2 full years of experience as the Georgia starting quarterback. That's not necessarily an easy transition. And even in a great moment for Georgia on Saturday, it wasn't always an easy transition, even on Saturday. So let's keep that realistic, and let's be ready to celebrate what could be a great moment for Gunner, and perhaps a springboard to even more success for him in 2025. How great would it be to have Georgia rolling in the next season with like a firmly entrenched starting quarterback who had some great moments in the college football playoff, or maybe even the ultimate moment in the college football playoff? That'd be a pretty good thing here. So the next few weeks for the Dogs, I think, are going to be so compelling, richly entertaining. I just can't wait to see how this story plays out from here. I think it's going to be awesome. Something else I'm looking forward to as we head towards 2025, big things with Royal Caribbean. Now, it was almost exactly a year ago, not quite a year ago, but almost exactly a year ago, I had a chance to do truly one of the most awe-inspiring things I had done in quite some time. I had a chance to be on Icon of the Seas, largest cruise ship ever constructed, sailing out of the port of Miami. By the way, hoping to be in Miami again here in a few weeks, hoping for that anyway. I had a chance to be on Icon of the Seas, and I got to tell you, the way in which Icon sort of redefines the cruise experience, I just think is something that you got to be aware of if you're looking for a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here in 2025. So if you're watching on video, we're kind of walking along the Royal Promenade here, and I think this is cool. You just saw the Pearl a moment ago. That's the big sort of, thing that you see right when you kind of come onto the ship for the very first time. I also love the fact that on this ship, the Royal Promenade, which is essentially like the main thoroughfare in the sort of interior part of the ship, I love the open windows. You can see under the ocean. I love the fact that you've got 2 levels of that. Like, everything on Icon of the Seas is just bigger. So it's a great chance for you to be on board Icon of the Seas here in January. In fact, give Jessica Slater a call. She can book your travel on Icon of the Seas. You can call her 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you going on a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation experience here in 2025. So I want to start our cruise around the SEC by mentioning something outside the SEC, but in a roundabout way, this also kind of reflects back to Georgia. By now, you've probably seen Bill Belichick has been hired as the next coach at North Carolina. Now, the initial report was this was a 3-year, $30 million deal. One of the main national guys had that. That's been since corrected. It's actually a 5-year, $50 million deal for Belichick. So this is a major financial commitment to a guy in his 70s who really has almost no college experience at all. Of course, arguably the greatest coach in NFL history, now giving it a try at the college game here in sort of the winter of his coaching career. And I think there's a very interesting divide where almost everybody that I kind of recognize in media as sort of being a part of our college football community, if you're a true college football person, the best that I can tell, that's me, that's you, that's other media types. If you're a real college football person, almost everybody thinks this is a total disaster. That Belichick's a really good coach. Obviously, his place as one of the all-time greats is, undebatable. But coming to college now, doing this at North Carolina, this just seems really weird. And it seems like there was a power struggle among some of the Board of Regents people in the state and perhaps some of the university athletic department officials about, kind of how all this, and somehow, some way, the people who wanted Belichick, or the person who perhaps wanted Belichick, just won. And I just don't think this is likely to succeed. I think it could fail spectacularly as soon as the first year. And I think you could be seeing a situation which North Carolina as a program is perhaps set back for many, many years because of this. And as I watched all of this play out, the one thing I couldn't help but think is North Carolina is a program that has some real value. That if the SEC was going to expand, I think a lot of people are aware of this, the University of North Carolina might be their first choice as the next SEC school. It's a southern state that's contiguous to the other SEC states, but there's not an SEC team currently in that state. It's got a really big fan base. I think the Big Ten would have some interest in UNC too if it were available. This is a real program that could have a very bright future, but hiring Bill Belichick is a really unserious thing. And one of the things you hear me sort of argue for in this space on the show a lot is I need to see the other programs in college football try a little harder to play at the SEC's level. That the SEC just puts together, I just think, a better brand of football. The games are more interesting. We're more entertained by the SEC product. The level of competition is just more intense because everyone in the SEC is seeing, at least the majority of this league, the overwhelming majority of this league, is just trying as hard as it can. Look at what Ole Miss did in the transfer portal. That made them fifth best in the league. Look at, even the teams that are sort of outside the playoff picture, they're still just trying to be as competitive as they can and seeking out the best possible decisions they can make to help them do that. I could be wrong about this, but I do not believe an SEC team would ever consider hiring Bill Belichick as its coach. It's a big splash. It gets a lot of attention. But SEC teams already get a lot of attention, and they don't want the wrong kind of attention. And the sort of desperation that this reeks of, I would say, for UNC is just the wrong kind of attention. This is not the thing that a serious football program would do, and too many of the non-SEC programs, especially in the ACC, too many of these programs are just not serious enough about college football. They want the college football money, but they don't want to make the kind of contribution that makes the sport better so everybody gets more money. That, to me, is a huge issue. Now, the reason why this sort of bumps into Georgia a bit is because there are reports out there that prior to hiring Belichick, they interviewed Glenn Schumann, I think twice, or at least they had conversations multiple times with Glenn Schumann. I guess that's the way this is being reported. One way or another, Schumann's, I think, getting pretty close to being a head coach, and I do believe that North Carolina would be a good job for him. If Schumann does return to Georgia in 2025, I believe that'll be good news for UGA. I think that Schumann's a really good coach. He's obviously an outstanding recruiter. So let's not talk about Schumann leaving for North Carolina. Let's just use, for a moment, Schumann as the sort of archetype of what they could have hired. Like when you interview Glenn Schumann, a guy that certainly compared to Bill Belichick is essentially not really famous at all, and even to a lot of hardcore football fans, I don't know how famous Glenn Schumann really is. So there's no like cult of personality around Schumann or anything like that. If you're interviewing him, it's just a football conversation. And if I had to guess, I don't know this for a fact, but Schumann's talking about what kind of support staff he'd like to have, what kind of salary pool he'd like to have for his assistants, what his plans are for high school recruiting, how you kind of control the geographic areas in North Carolina, how you sort of reach out of state, what your thoughts are on the transfer portal, what your thoughts are on how you marshal enough NIL dollars. Like, Schumann's going to have a very serious conversation about the important building blocks of football based on his time working with Nick Saban as an analyst and Kirby Smart as a coach and, a very high-profile defensive coordinator who's had great success in the field. It's a very serious conversation about how college football operates. I would suggest at 70-whatever years old Bill Belichick is, the interviews he was having with North Carolina are far different than that. And it's more about Belichick the person, whereas someone like Schumann, I'm not saying that Schumann should have gotten the job. I'm just saying a coach like Schumann with the background of a Glenn Schumann, instead of talking about himself the entire time, he's going to talk about the plan for how you put a program together. And if you're going to win, it's the coach with a plan that you hire more than the coach with a famous name. I think the North Carolina's gotten this really, really wrong. I think it's going to blow up very fast. And when it does, it's just going to be evidence of what a parasitic relationship a lot of non-SEC teams seem to have with the actual money makers in the sport. They just seem to siphon off dollars without really doing all that much to make the actual pool of money larger because they're just not as good as they otherwise could be. A couple of other things here real quick. Garrett Nussmeier is returning for LSU in 2025. I think it's a big deal for LSU. I think it's also an example of LSU's had a really hard time sort of figuring out certain things with the NIL space. Obviously, they lost out to Bryce Underwood, who goes to Michigan, so you got some money left over that you're going to pay him. Why not get your quarterback to come back? I would say that I probably think a little differently about Nussmeier now than I did at the beginning of the year. I thought at the beginning of the year, Nussmeier was going to be one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC. I think he's still good. At times, he was very good for LSU. But the race to be the best quarterback in the SEC is a lot more crowded than it once was. For instance, to begin the year next year, the guy that's going to probably get the most chatter is probably Lenora Sellers from South Carolina. And let's watch Nico Iamaleava in the playoffs. Up until now, Nico has not really had what I would think of a great year as the starting quarterback for Tennessee, but he was good against Vanderbilt, and he has a chance to make a real name for himself here in the college football playoff. And obviously there's going to be a period of transition for other teams at quarterback, so maybe LSU bringing their guy back, maybe that does give them a leg up. But Nussmeier's return, I think, shines the first light we have on just how interesting of a year's worth of transition it's going to be for the SEC at quarterback. And for LSU, that has not really succeeded yet in bringing in the big-time transfers that have come over and helped make them more of a contender. At least in this case, they show some ability to hold on to one of their own. And obviously, that'll be a big topic as we move into the upcoming season. Finally, there's this. And this is one of those things where I think at first blush perhaps doesn't seem all that interesting, but on closer inspection is actually a lot more interesting than initially appears. Do y'all remember on Sunday, right before the college football playoff announcement was made, Brett McMurphy, who's a longtime reporter, essentially reported on the record that SMU was going to make the playoff. And I was on the air when it happened, and I saw some of you commenting in the comment section about that in the chat about McMurphy saying this. And at the time, I thought it was like just the sort of speculation that everybody sort of does. But this was not speculation. This was him reporting on the record it was going to happen because somebody who knew leaked it to him. Now, ultimately, this doesn't really matter all that much to most of you because it just sort of seems like sort of inside media baseball here a little bit. But keep this in mind. Rich Clark, who's the executive director of the college football playoff, not the committee chairman, but the guy who runs the business now, replacing Bill Hancock, he spoke to Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports the other day. And Clark said he was basically furious about this. I think the actual word was infuriated. He was infuriated to hear about this. Clark pointing out that he says, A, I'm not the leaker. B, the leaker had to come from one of three sources. It's either someone on the committee, it's someone who works for the CFP, like one of the employees, or it's somebody who works for ESPN. They're getting the graphics together and things like this. The reason why this matters is, and by the way, Clark says he doesn't know who it is, and they're not going to really search out to figure out who it is. I don't know if I believe that or not, but he didn't want to reveal publicly who it was, whether he knows that or not. But the reason why this matters is because you can bet on this stuff, and we know the odds on SMU to make the playoff changed dramatically right before the playoff field was announced. Now, that also basically happened last year with Alabama, too. So sometimes people just sort of think they know whether they do or not. In the case of Alabama a year ago and SMU this year, those folks got it right. But when you have a dramatic change in the gambling odds and an obvious leak, and as Ross Dellinger from Yahoo pointed out, this is thought to be the first time in the history of the playoff, 11 years, that anyone's leaked the field prior to it being announced. Y'all, I mean, I don't make this too dramatic, but Martha Stewart went to prison for insider trading. And if it's an ESPN employee who perhaps did this, like ESPN is in bed with ESPN Bet. Brett McMurphy, who got the leak on this, he works for the Action Network. That's also a gambling site. This is one of those things where, I don't know how deep into the investigation anybody gets, but if you leaked this essentially actionable intelligence to the public and someone used that to make a big bet, I mean, based on my understanding, that's a crime. That's fraud, I think, right? So this is one of those deals. I don't know how deep anybody gets into this, but in the world in which we live now, where the gambling stuff and the media stuff are so intertwined, be careful that you don't become Martha Stewart, because it can happen if you are not careful. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, I'll tell you, a group of folks would never get mixed up, anything sorted like that. That's our people from Jittery Joe's. And by the way, what a great time this is when it comes to Jittery Joe's. We showed this to you on Saturday. In fact, we actually gave this away at our DawgNation Invasion tailgate on Saturday. The tremendous gift pack here of commemorative cans from Jittery Joe's, celebrating great moments for Georgia, like the national championships in 2021 and 2022. How about getting a chance to celebrate that and give the gift of coffee to someone in your life? The great tasting coffee of Jittery Joe's inside these commemorative cans, officially licensed by UGA. All of that, really incredible. It's Athens' best coffee shop and has been now 14 years running. Locally owned and roasted for the last 30 years. You love all of that. And they've also launched a franchise company now, too. So if you want to be a part of the absolute best coffee in Athens and bring that to your own town and have a great business turnkey that's really, really smooth, the folks from Jittery Joe's are incredibly sharp businessmen and women that are really, really good at all of that. You can learn from them, and you can be set up to thrive yourself. So if you're interested in that, or if you just want a commemorative can for Christmas, sort of all levels of interest here, check out the website, jitteryjoes.com. Download the Jittery Joe's app. You can get some great savings on your next beverage. Just have a really good time here this holiday season with our friends from Jittery Joe's. Before I give out golden shoes, let me also remind you on this. I believe we're very, very close to giving you all the full details on our DawgNation invasion to New Orleans. In fact, I think I should be able to maybe tell you more about that, maybe about tomorrow. So we will see on that. But don't forget, we're going to New Orleans. It's going to be a great time. We want you to come with us as a part of a great series of events, DawgNation Invasion to New Orleans. DawgNation.com/tailgate. That'll be the place to go to find out more about that, powered by our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips. We'll give you more information about that then. How about some golden shoes here for today? By the way, Kevin shares this from Lance on X, Lance Sports Media, saying that Georgia cornerback Dalen Everett was named the 2024 SEC Championship MVP, but he also shot his first deer on Sunday. What a weekend for him. I guess Wes Wilson is the one who took the photo here of Dalen Everett. So bags a couple of interceptions and bags his first deer as well. Kevin shared that with me. We'll give golden shoes all the way around for that. And our buddy Mad Dog, speaking of news around the SEC or news involving former SEC names, we may have Dan Mullen back in our life again here. It has been reported that Mullen could be close to becoming the next UNLV head coach. Mad Dog writes in to say UNLV moving to finalize the deal with Dan Mullen. We could be finally getting a sequel to Vegas Vacation. Y'all remember that? With Cousin Eddie out there with Chevy Chase. It was the sort of, I guess, the last in the Griswold family canon, I reckon. You remember Eddie played a very prominent role in that movie. Maybe Dan Mullen kind of reprising his sort of Cousin Eddie lookalike out there in Las Vegas. I think Mad Dog could be onto something there. We'll give him a golden shoe. And you know what? We'll give Dan Mullen a golden shoe, too, because we haven't been able to make fun of him very much lately. But if he's back coaching at UNLV, that could be a fertile soil indeed. Lousy, stinking Gators, speaking of them, we're coming up on 1,500 days. I believe it's Monday for us on the 1,500-day mark. But for now, 1,496 days, 1,496. That's how long it's been since the lousy, stinking Gators are beating the Georgia Bulldogs. We love our Gator Hater Updater, and we love all of you, too. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We will look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Okay, so I have to go early today. I know we had some issues with our comments beforehand. Sometimes, it seems like lately there's a little bit of issue with some of the stuff in the building. But I apologize for that. Either way, though, we're going to get some comments. We're going to have a good time. But I do have to be kind of a quick run through the comments here today. And maybe we'll have time to do more of that tomorrow. But just got a little bit going on there. UJ Marine says the Eddie character is funny, but Randy Quaid in real life had his wheels come flying off. Yeah, I don't know a lot of the details related to that, but I did know that Randy Quaid had something going on. It's one of those things where, like, I'm sort of generally aware of the existence of news, but not all that aware of what the specific news is. But, yeah. UJ Marine says he thought I had to go early. So yesterday I said I had to go earlier, and then I didn't. But today I really do have to do that. It's one of those things where, like, we're sort of post-SEC championship, so there's a lot of family stuff that my wife's been doing without me. All of a sudden she's like, I'm not doing this anymore, in obviously a loving, kind way. So I'm on family duty a little bit this week. Let us see what else on DawgNation.com. Savannah Bryan says, I'll be shocked if there are not big changes to the committee next year. This year was a big disaster than a congressional delegation. Yeah, I mean, I think we've got major change coming to the playoff in general. Now, whether or not that happens next year or they just wait for 2026, I don't know. But a major change, I believe, is coming. And I do think it's probably worth going to read the thing that Sankey said to Dellinger the other day about, kind of investigating the sort of the SEC standings a little bit more. The thing that I've said is the best solution for the issue of who does and doesn't get in the playoffs is to sort of take it out of the hands of the committee and put it more in the hands of your league standings. In the NFL, we don't debate who makes the playoffs because it's all based on winning percentage and tiebreakers and things like that. And that's a lot easier to do when you've only got 32 teams in a sport. It's more difficult in college football. But I am personally in favor of a bigger playoff that makes for more opportunities for the right teams to get in. In other words, I'd take a 16-team playoff if the right 12 teams got in. And if we're doing a true, genuine playoff of the 12 best teams, then not only should Alabama have been in, but so should Ole Miss and South Carolina. That if it's truly the 12 best teams, there are 6 SEC teams that should have been in. In order to get the true 12 best, you probably have to put, say, 16 teams overall. And if you expand to 16, well, that means that some teams that are not deserving the playoff probably get in. But honestly, there are teams in the playoff right now that are not deserving that are probably in. So I'd be in favor of a 16-team playoff. I'd be in favor of 4 teams from each of the Power 4 leagues. Now, ultimately, it's not quite all. It's not that simple because you still got Notre Dame that's an independent. You still got the groups of 5, a group of 5 that you got to think of. They're going to sue for antitrust. So it's not as simple as I'm saying it. But if I did have full autonomy to do the fairest thing, it'd be 4 from the Big 12, 4 from the ACC, 4 from the Big 10, 4 from the SEC. The conference would be responsible for deciding who their 4 is. And so if you've got some complaint about, why so-and-so's not in, then your beef is with your commissioner. It's not with the committee. The committee no longer exists because these people are not good at their job. And as the alleged league points, they may even be corrupt, but they're at the very least not good at their job. So therefore, no reason for them to exist. Put it in the hands of the actual conferences to decide who their teams are. And so then, SEC 1 plays Big 12 4 or whatever else, but that's how you do it. Let's see what else. Trippy Charlie says the SEC schedule makers gave Texas a bye before playing Georgia. He says at this point, who's surprised about all of that? Yeah, I know that's going to come up about, who got byes ahead of Georgia, ahead of playing Georgia. But keep in mind, there are also, I guess there's another calendar anomaly next year. There are 2 byes on the schedule. And so I believe that 4 teams have byes prior to playing Georgia. But in 2 of those 4, Georgia also has a bye too. So, in addition to the Bama and Florida game, I guess Texas does and somebody else does. And really all of that, Alabama's been living that world for years. For a long period of time, Alabama, had 5 teams with off weeks before playing Alabama. There's actually a really good story in the, do you know what AL.com is? It's the big media entity in Alabama that covers, stuff over there. They had a really good story years ago about all these teams that want their bye before playing Alabama. But if they were really smart, they'd put their bye after playing Alabama because there's this huge collection of teams that lose to Bama and then lose the next game they're playing, no matter who it is, that there's a little bit of a, kind of a, whatever you call it, sort of a letdown. You're beat up after playing Alabama, so you end up losing your next game. And so what the AL.com story said was, I always remember this because I thought it was a really good point. If you're really smart, you'd put your bye after Alabama, not before it, but after it. So that way, you're not quite as beat up the following Saturday. And so, Georgia facing these teams coming off byes, this is not unique to Georgia. That's been going on for Alabama for a long time. Let's see what else. Garrison Tucker says the committee is the federal government of college football. In some respects, it sort of seems that way. I mean, it does. I mean, obviously, we don't ever bring in like politics, stuff like that. But the stuff that you don't like about bureaucracy, you don't like about the college football playoff selection committee. It at least rhymes with each other, if nothing else. DMart42 says, I think that Vegas should be a weighted factor in the committee decision. Yeah, this is one of those deals where I think the basketball committee actually does a much better job than the football committee does. The basketball committee makes decisions where tough schedules are incentivized. And part of that's because basketball sort of only makes money when it plays big games, whereas football would make money no matter what. And so, therefore, basketball has to incentivize strength of schedule because they want the kind of dollars that come from the sort of games that get played at the beginning of the season. So they want that incentivized. Football does not really incentivize tough scheduling the way the basketball committee does. The other thing I think the basketball committee does really well is they have what they call like their NET standings. They used to be the RPI. Like there is a better understanding of metrics in the basketball committee than there is in the football committee. Like the football committee is given like reams and reams of paper with all kinds of numbers on there, but it's not obvious those people really understand any of that stuff or actually really use it. Now there is like this one analytics dude that says that if you look at the committee over the years, what you see is you either have to have a strong strength of schedule or a strong game control against a weak schedule. That there's essentially a sliding scale of like game control compared to strength of schedule, and that's essentially what the playoffs do. Whether that's true or not, there is a theory that's out there that they really do use a metric that they don't really say much about. But the sense that I get is the people in that room don't really understand analytics very well, the sort of things that Vegas lines are built on, the sort of stuff like basketball has with the NET or the RPI. They just don't really get that. They just don't. They just, you know. And most of the people on the committee, and I've said this before, they're essentially just packing peanuts. You know, there are a lot of people in there to sort of make the room seem full, but the actual decision is made before those people get in the room. It's always the meeting before the meeting that real power is expressed. And that's true in everything. Let's see what else. Lance D says something. I have thought this myself. In fact, I think I've even said this to somebody. 100% right. Lance said, this is as true a thing as going to be said. He says that 2024 South Carolina is 2007 Georgia. He says they should have been in, no question, playing the toughest brand of football out there. Totally agree. If there had been a playoff in 2007 and Georgia could have been in it, Georgia would have been heck on wheels. They would have been an absolute bowling ball of razor blades had they been in the playoff. They were playing so good at the end of the season. Honestly, I think South Carolina would be that way right now. I mean, I hate to say this. I'm sort of glad Georgia didn't play South Carolina because I think South Carolina right now is really, really good. Very, very similar. A team that was sort of hot at the end of the season, but not quite handling its business early in the year, and therefore opportunity to be left out. Lance, I think you're 100% right about that. I think you're 100% right about that. All right, let me get a couple of Facebooks here. And then after that, we got to get ready to go. All right, on Facebook. We'll see how everybody's doing. Let's see if we can get this going. Here we go. Ken Olcom says next season's schedule looks much better than the one we just played, other than 3 teams having bye weeks before playing us. Is it 3? I thought it was 4. But Georgia's also got 2 byes too. So Florida and Alabama, they have byes, but you also have byes before those games as well. Ira Brashad checks in to say, living in Texas, I can tell you that Texas fans are despondent about losing to us twice. They're frustrated with Sark and more frustrated with Ewers and calling for Arch full time. They do not acknowledge any of the favoritism the SEC's given to them. Perhaps not surprising that on the end. And look, the Manning Ewers thing, we were kind of on this early. that while Quinn Ewers had an awesome game last year at Alabama, he really has not been what I would think of as a great quarterback really since then. And so, deep down, Sark sort of got to know that, right? And honestly, I think there are a lot of people that were on guard for Manning to be overrated because, hey, it's a famous last name and people are going to hype him up no matter what. And all of that was potentially well-founded. But I think there are a lot of people around the Texas program that do think Arch Manning can be really, really good. Now, the greatest quarterback from the word go right when he steps in? No, probably not. Probably needs some time to grow into the role a little bit. But, I've heard people around there think that he's really pretty good. And I do not believe that Texas can win a national championship with Quinn Ewers. I just don't. So we'll see if they consider making that change during the playoff. Perhaps they just don't want to rock the boat and maybe are content to, give Manning his shot next year. But next year he'll be a junior. If he comes and plays, he's going to have 1 year of him starting at quarterback. That seems kind of weird to me. Philip Jordan Wells says there's actually another Griswold family movie called Vacation. It has Ed Helms as a grown-up Rusty. I don't consider that canon, though. To me, the Griswold canon is original Vacation, European, Christmas, and then Vegas. That's the Griswold canon as far as I'm concerned. Because I think there's like Christmas Vacation 2 and no telling how many spinoffs involving whatever. But to me, there are 4 vacation movies. Now, the truth is, and I know this is, many of you will disagree with this, the only of those movies that I really care about is the Christmas Vacation. I don't care anything about Big Ben Parliament. I don't care anything about Wally World. The Vegas movie I've seen. I don't find it to be anything that I want to go back and rewatch necessarily. But I love Christmas Vacation, as so many people in my generation sort of do. Of all the sort of Griswold, sort of not quite trilogy, I don't guess, because there's 4 movies. Christmas Vacation is really the only one I care about. Bill Sanders says they put the Georgia-Texas game late in the year, so by that time, Arch Manning can be settled in as a quarterback. That's interesting. Jonathan Moore says the Vegas one is great. It's pretty funny. But Christmas Vacation just has a special place in my heart, man. I remember the first time I watched that, and, as a kid, I probably should not have been watching it, a little bit, racier content than certainly I don't let my kids watch that now. But I remember, gosh, my dad was just laughing at that movie so much. It's hard for me to watch that movie without thinking about how funny my dad, really the whole family thought it was, first time we saw it. Like, you remember just how, it was so much laughter. Really funny movie. Edwina Atwood says she's watching Christmas Vacation right now. So Edwina's got a 2-screen experience. It's almost like we're the director's cut for her watching Christmas Vacation. It's a really funny movie. Really funny movie. I bet I could almost do the director's cut for that. Bill Shirley says on YouTube his whole family loves Christmas Vacation. It's a great movie. It's a great movie. Crow King 123 says it's sadder now that Dad passed. Yeah, there's a lot of emotion in that movie. I think they do a good job of capturing that. I think it's also one of those things where it was the first movie that I know of where it was kind of made okay to admit that Christmas can be a little bit hard, because I think people are made to feel bad about that. And now, listen, I love Christmas, and I'm not one of these people that's really cynical about Christmas. But even if you love it, even if you're sort of I always kind of think of myself as sort of a modern day kind of Griswold, even if you sort of feel that way, it's hard. Like, the Christmas lights just don't work sometimes. And, all that kind of stuff. And that movie sort of made it okay to admit that sometimes Christmas is just a little bit hard. And I think that was, I was a kid when the movie came out, but I look back on it and I sort of get the impression that the adults liked the movie because it was admitting some things that they sort of were always thinking, but no other movie sort of gave you permission to say out loud. I think there's probably some of that going on there. And what's weird is, it's obviously been around now 30 whatever years. It's now a classic in its own right. And as one of our commenters is mentioning, So now you sort of think about the people you watched the movie with. And like my memory of that is that I want to say that was maybe like one of the first movies that I watched when our family got a VCR, to give you an idea of how old I am. We had VCRs. But like kind of a big deal to have a VCR and go rent a movie to watch on the VCR. I remember that was a big deal. And, that was like, the height of technology for us back then. Early days of VCR in my family, I believe. I know VCRs had existed long before that, but for us, I think the VCR is a relatively new experience. Sitting around as a family watching that, my dad was dying laughing. I remember that so well. Wyatt Fielden asking about North Carolina as a threat to Georgia recruiting. I really don't. I just think all of this, and then listen, if I'm wrong about this, then I'll just be wrong. But I don't think that Bill Belichick is going to be a good recruiter. I don't. I think he has a pretty good eye for talent. But honestly, there are plenty of things the Patriots did from a draft standpoint, things like that, where, he didn't quite get that right. And here's the one thing that I think that gets misunderstood sometimes, that scouting at the NFL level is way easier than scouting at the college level, because at the NFL level, you've got an entire college career to look at. These kids are 3 or 4 more years removed from high school. You've got way more data to help you make a decision, and they still barely get it right. The college programs, their scouting is so good because they are scouting on such a limited window of information. Some of these kids don't even play that much in high school. You'd be surprised at how many of the really good players in college are just kind of out there in high school. They're either on a bad team or they got bad whatever. They're projects, works in progress. Like these guys that scout these college players on the basis of very, very small information coming from high school, it's really hard. Belichick ain't gonna be able to do that. Bill Shirley says he used to have to rent the VCR to watch the movies. I do actually remember, I want to say we did that one time. We rented a VCR to watch something. I think that did happen. I think with my grandparents maybe one time. I love the way that, I've always been big into smells. I like smells. I love the way that cassette tapes used to smell. And I love the way that when you open the VCR, that area where the tape went, I really like that smell. In sort of a non-physical media world, we sort of miss the smells sometimes. That's a very weird thing. I don't dispute that. So if you're laughing at how strange that is, totally get that. But I do enjoy, I used to like the smell of the video store. Video store had kind of a unique smell to it. Baseball card shop sort of had a little bit of a similar smell. A lot of it was just carpet. But there was a smell to this stuff. And I kind of miss that. See, I knew y'all would think that was weird. And you're very right to do so. But from a kid till now, just sort of very, very distinctive with the smells and stuff. Brandon Griffin says it's not Christmas until Hans Gruber falls from Nakatomi Tower. So there you go. A little bit of a nod for Die Hard as a Christmas movie. All right, we got to get ready to go. I knew. See, Jimmy Gibbs is in here thinking I'm the weirdest guy in the world. I knew. I think that, but I do. Always big into smells. Yes, I don't dispute that. I'm more than happy to do that. But there was definitely, when I think of VCRs and cassette tapes and things like that, one of the first things that comes to mind was what all that kind of stuff smelled like. All right, let's get ready to go. Good stuff here, as always. Appreciate that. DT thinks that Bill Belichick will hire Connor Stallions on his staff. Did y'all hear this? This is a crazy story. I think this is true. This day and age, you never really know. But did you know that, the famous flip, Michigan getting Bryce Underwood, do you know that Connor Stallions had been hired as the offensive coordinator at Bryce Underwood's high school before the flip. I think that's true. If it's not, fact check me. But I believe that's true, which is just crazy. Yeah, we're being asked if Saban's going to be an unofficial consultant. They're obviously pretty close. Maybe there'll be some talk about that. So, yeah, perhaps he does help out. And people will think about, Saban and the Belichick mold here. It's important to note, like, Saban, before going to the Dolphins, had been at Toledo and Michigan State and won a national championship at LSU. Like, this was a real hardcore college guy. Brief tenure in the NFL as a head coach, and then, like, right back to Alabama. Very, very different overall. But maybe Saban will try to give him some advice. But if he gave him the best advice, it'd be, don't do this. I also have, sometimes we talk about, like, crackpot conspiracy theories. I have a little bit of a, let me not say that. I have a little bit of a conspiracy theory about Belichick in the NFL, but let me not go down that road. Let's see what else. See, Pete Williams understands. He likes the smell of popcorn in a movie theater. I love that. You walk into the major movie theater. I love the smell of that popcorn. I do. I'm really, when I think about things, I oftentimes think about smells. The popcorn movie theater smell is a great one. Great one. And it's got to be like the true popcorn, the movie theater popcorn. Big fan of that. Big fan of that. Charlie Baker, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. Paul Moon says we don't have a Blu-ray player anymore in our house. Everything is digital. And I think that's true for most everybody now. But there's some huge issues with that. Sometimes these, like the streamer platforms, sometimes they just get rid of stuff. And if you don't have the physical media, you don't have the thing anymore. I know sometimes for, like, music people, like, this doesn't really impact me very much. But, like, if you own an album on Apple, sometimes Apple will come through and just sort of replace that rare recording with sometimes a less rare recording. Like I said, I'm not into all that kind of thing, so I don't necessarily care. But people will talk about that sometimes on Apple. The non-physical albums get replaced. It's the same songs, but it's not the same recording of those songs, and that kind of drives people crazy. But these streaming platforms, especially. Oh, look at this. We have a VCR. Cody Chafin's here.
Christmas came early.
Look at that. Here's a VCR. Let's see if this one smells good. This doesn't really smell like the VCR when I was a kid.
Like my attic.
Yeah, that's a real VCR right there. We also have all this stuff in my house that we can't really watch without a VCR, like our wedding and things like that. We don't have. Yeah, there you go. May create a meme of me smelling that VCR. That's very funny. All right. Gary Roach says he likes the smell of old cars. I love that too. I know exactly what you're talking about. I like going into like a dealership. You smell the tires. When you walk in, because they always have the models inside the shop, and so you smell the tires. I love the smell of that. Paul Moon says he still has a bunch of DVDs and Blu-rays, things like that. There was this thing a couple years ago where supposedly the Nintendo cartridges were collectible. I think that was actually a pump and dump. I think that was actually proven to not quite be what it was, purported to be. But there was a thing for a while that, you're going to collect Nintendo cartridges like you're collecting sports cards, things like that. I think that wasn't quite what it was like, cracked up to be. Maybe one day this stuff will be collectible. Who knows? Maybe that'll be the case. Chef Jay Bowen says, I have about 1,000 vinyl, 800 CDs in my house. I've been collecting for 30 years. I would never get rid of it because some of the stuff is actually not on out. Yeah, that's the thing. Is like a lot of this physical media is just not available anywhere. Rare recordings, things like that. Disney Plus, for instance, is always getting rid of stuff. One of these days, they'll probably, like in our house, the only Disney movies we watch are old movies. We don't watch the new stuff really all that much. We watch a lot of the old stuff. And, I mean, you never know. Here's the best example of all. This is the best example of all. If you do not have physical media, you cannot watch the original Star Wars movies that that were, shown in theaters. The original Star Wars movies are not available on any streaming platform anywhere because George Lucas, and it's his art, so I guess he gets to do with what he wants. But the only thing that he'll allow to be shown on Disney Plus or wherever these things have been shown, but now it's only Disney Plus, is the kind of like the what do you call it, like the updated trilogy that he did back in the 90s, where you kind of put in the extra scenes and you kind of make the whole thing a little bit more digitized than the old movies were. So if you want the original trilogy as it originally aired, and you don't have that on, like, say, cassette tape, probably, I don't know if there's any kind of like laser disc that has it or not, because all of this was sort of pre-90s. The Star Wars movies as they aired, that's not available on anything that's not physical, I don't believe. Star Wars Dog, by the way, checking in there on that. For sure. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Glad that you were here. And by the way, Curtis also brings up the best smell of all. You walk into a bakery, there's like baking bread. That's fantastic. That's a great smell. That's a great smell. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Y'all have a great day. Check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning. See, Lance D says, the non-remastered Star Wars trilogy is a gold mine if you can find them anywhere. Yeah, I'm sure. Because I would say that I would probably prefer the non-special edition trilogy. I don't love the add-ons to the original movies. I don't necessarily hate them either, but my preference would be the movies as they originally aired. But you can't really get that. So that's a good example of that. All right, we got to go. rsandrews.com, online, water heater, get it replaced, heating system, get it tuned up, some sort of electrical issue, something goes crazy in the kind of the part of the house you can't really see behind the walls, all those systems, they can fix all that for you. Find them online, rsandrews.com for that. Y'all have a great day. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.